The year was 1863, and the world was tearing itself apart. The Battle of Wilderness Run wasn't just a fight, it was a storm of smoke and blood, a howling chaos where men faced death with every breath. Picture it: the sky choked with grey, the ground trembling under cannon fire, and the air so thick with gunpowder you could taste it on your tongue. In the middle of it all stood Caleb Thornton, a captain with a face carved from grit and sorrow, his dark eyes searching for a way to save his men. He was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man you'd follow into hell itself, and that's exactly where he was. Caleb's voice roared over the madness, sharp as a whip. "Hold the line," he shouted, his words a lifeline for the soldiers clinging to hope. But hope was slipping away fast. The enemy was a tide, rolling in with numbers they couldn't match, their bayonets glinting like teeth in the dim light. Caleb knew it: surrender wasn't an option. Not for him, not for the boys who looked to him to bring them home. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. That's when he turned to Samuel Carter. Samuel was young, barely 25, with a quiet strength that made you trust him the moment you met him. His sandy hair was matted with sweat, his blue eyes steady even as the world burned around him. He'd been Caleb's shadow since the war started, his lieutenant, his friend, the brother he'd never had. Now, Caleb had to ask him for the impossible. "Samuel," Caleb said, gripping his shoulder, his voice rough with urgency, "I need you to take 25 men into the forest. Hold the enemy back, give us time to retreat. It's our only shot." The words hung heavy between them, heavier than the smoke curling through the air. Samuel's face tightened, just for a heartbeat, but he didn't flinch. He knew what it meant. That forest was a death trap, a tangle of trees and shadows where 25 men couldn't hope to stop an army. But he also knew Caleb wouldn't ask unless there was no other way. "Yes, sir," Samuel said, his voice calm, like he was agreeing to fetch water instead of marching to his grave. He turned, calling out names: Tom, Elijah, Will, gathering a ragtag band of soldiers who'd follow him anywhere. They were a mix of farm boys and city kids, their faces pale but their jaws set. Rifles clutched tight in trembling hands. Caleb grabbed his arm before he could go. "Samuel, wait." His voice cracked, softer now, almost pleading. "You don't have to do this. I'll find another way." Samuel met his gaze, and there was a flicker of something, maybe fear, maybe peace. Then he smiled, faint and real. "There's no other way. Caleb, you know it. And I'm not afraid." He paused, reaching into his coat. His fingers found a small, creased photograph, edges worn from too many nights in his pocket. He pressed it into Caleb's hand. "If I don't come back, give this to my sister, Clara. Tell her I wasn't afraid." Caleb took it, his throat tight. The photograph showed a girl, Clara Carter, maybe 20, with soft brown hair framing a face that radiated kindness. Her eyes were wide and warm, like she could see right through you, and there was a hint of a smile that made you want to smile back. Caleb didn't know her, but holding that picture, he felt the weight of Samuel's love for her, the unspoken promise tying them together. "I'll tell her," Caleb said, barely above a whisper. "I swear." Samuel nodded, then turned away, leading his men into the forest. They vanished into the green, swallowed by the trees, and soon the crack of gunfire and the shouts of battle followed. Caleb stood there, the photograph burning a hole in his pocket, his heart pounding with a mix of pride and dread. He'd sent his best friend to die, and there was no taking it back. The hours dragged on, each minute a knife twisting in Caleb's gut. When the fighting finally stopped, when the enemy retreated and the silence settled like dust, he went looking. The forest was a graveyard. Bodies sprawled over roots and rocks, blood staining the earth red. And there, beneath a splintered oak, was Samuel. His rifle lay beside him, his chest still, his eyes open to a sky he'd never see again. Caleb dropped to his knees, the world blurring through tears he couldn't stop. He reached out, gentle, closing Samuel's eyes with a trembling hand. "Rest now, my friend," he whispered, the words choking in his throat. "You were never afraid." He slipped the photograph back into his pocket, a silent vow etched deep in his bones. He'd find Clara. He'd tell her what Samuel wanted her to know. But even as he made that promise, he knew it wouldn't mend the hole this day had torn in him. The ghosts of Wilderness Run would cling to him, whispering in the quiet, for years to come. 11 years would pass before fate called him back to the fight, back to a woman named Clara, and a story that would change everything. But that's a tale for another day. For now, let this sink in the Wild West. Bravery isn't just a word, it's a debt paid in blood, a legacy carved in sacrifice. And sometimes the smallest thing's a photograph. A promise can spark a fire that burns across a lifetime. If this story of honor and heartbreak has gripped you, don't let it go just yet. Hit that like button, drop a comment, tell us what moved you most, and subscribe to Wild West Stories for the next chapter. We've got 7 more parts coming, packed with love, danger, and the kind of justice that only the frontier can deliver. Stick with us, because this is only the beginning. The Montana sun hung low, painting the hills gold and casting long shadows across Caleb Thornton's ranch. It was 1874 now, 11 years since the smoke and screams of Wilderness Run had scarred his soul. Caleb had traded his captain's stripes for a plow and a quiet life. Or so he thought. His hands, once steady with a rifle, now gripped the reins of a plow horse, coaxing life from the stubborn earth. The ranch was small, just a weathered cabin, a barn, and a few acres of wheat swaying in the breeze, but it was his refuge, a place to outrun the ghosts that still woke him at night. He was 35 now, though his dark eyes carried the weight of a man much older. His beard was flecked with grey, his shoulders broad from years of war and work. The photograph of Clara Carter, Samuel's sister, sat on his mantel, untouched but never forgotten. He hadn't found her yet, hadn't even tried. The shame of that failure gnawed at him, quiet but constant, like a splinter he couldn't pull out. Every time he looked at that picture, he saw Samuel's face, heard his final words, "Tell her I wasn't afraid." But Montana was vast, and Caleb was just one man, worn down by memories he couldn't bury. On this particular evening, the air was warm, thick with the scent of pine and dust. Caleb was mending a fence near the creek when he heard the clatter of hooves, fast and frantic. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, and saw a boy tearing across the field on a scrawny pony. It was Jimmy, the 12-year-old son of a neighbor, all freckles and wild red hair, his eyes wide with urgency. "Mr. Thornton," Jimmy called, reining in the pony so hard it nearly skidded. "You gotta come quick. It's Eagle Creek." There's trouble. Caleb's gut tightened. Eagle Creek was the nearest town, a rough patch of saloons and shops where trouble was never far off. "Slow down, Jimmy," he said, his voice calm but firm. "What's happened? It's Clara Carter." Jimmy panted, his words tumbling out. "Jasper Kane's got her in the square, they're whipping her. Mr. Thornton. She wouldn't marry him, and now they're making her pay for it." The name hit Caleb like a bullet. Clara Carter, Samuel's sister, the girl in the photograph. His heart lurched, and for a moment he was back in that forest, Samuel's blood on his hands. He didn't ask questions, he didn't need to. He grabbed his hat and his old revolver, the weight of it familiar in his palm, and swung onto his horse. "Stay here, Jimmy," he said, his voice low. "Dangerous. I'll handle this." The ride to Eagle Creek was a blur of hoofbeats and dust, the wind whipping past Caleb's face as his mind raced. Clara Carter, here, in Montana. After all these years, she'd found her way to him, or maybe fate had. But Jasper Kane. That name carried venom. Kane was a cattle baron, a man with money and power who treated Eagle Creek like his personal kingdom. If he was hurting Clara, it wasn't just personal, it was a message to anyone who dared defy him. The town square was a spectacle when Caleb arrived. A crowd had gathered, their faces a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. In the center stood Clara, her wrists bound to a post, her dress torn at the shoulder, her brown hair, just like in the photograph, fell loose around her face, streaked with dirt and sweat, but those eyes wide, warm, defiant, burned with a fire that made Caleb's breath catch. She wasn't broken, not even close. She was fighting, even as the lash marks bloomed red across her back. Jasper Kane stood nearby. his polished boots gleaming in the dust, a cruel smile curling his lips. He was a big man, broad and barrel-chested, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that gleamed with greed. His men flanked him, rifles slung low, daring anyone to step forward. "You'll learn." "Clara," he drawled, his voice loud enough for the crowd to hear. "No one says no to me." Caleb didn't hesitate. He pushed through the crowd, his presence parting them like a blade through grass. "That's enough." "Kane," he said, his voice cutting through the air like a gunshot. Every head turned, and Clara's eyes met his, sharp with surprise and something else, hope. Maybe, or recognition. Kane laughed, a low, ugly sound. "Caleb Thornton, the hermit rancher. What's this got to do with you?" Caleb's hand rested on his revolver, his gaze never leaving Kane's. "I'm making it my business. Let her go." The crowd held its breath. Kane's smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed. Sizing Caleb up. "You got $600 in gold." "Thornton. That's her debt to me, her father's debt." "Really?" "Pay it, or she stays right here." Caleb's jaw tightened. $600 was more than most men saw in a year. He didn't have it, not in gold, not in cash. But he thought of Samuel, of the photograph, of the promise he'd made. He reached into his coat, pulling out a small pouch of gold dust, the last of his savings from years of scraping by. "Take this," he said, tossing it at Kane's feet. "And we're done." Kane's men stepped forward, but he raised a hand, stopping them. He picked up the pouch, weighed it in his hand, and smirked. "You're a fool." "Thornton, but fine, she's yours." He nodded to his men, who cut Clara's ropes. She stumbled, but Caleb was there, catching her before she fell. Her skin was warm under his hands, her breath ragged but strong. "Come on," he murmured, guiding her away from the square. The crowd parted, whispering, as Caleb led her to his horse. She didn't speak, didn't cry, just held her head high, her eyes locked on the horizon. He helped her up, then swung into the saddle behind her, urging the horse toward his ranch. The weight of her against him, the faint scent of lavender in her hair, stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years. Back at the ranch, Caleb settled Clara by the fire, wrapping her in a blanket. She winced as he cleaned her wounds, but she didn't flinch. "Why'd you do it?" she asked, her voice soft but steady, those wide eyes searching his face. "You don't even know me." Caleb paused, the photograph burning in his mind. He could tell her now about Samuel, about the war, but the words stuck in his throat. "Instead," he said, "I know enough. No one deserves what Kane did to you." Clara's gaze softened, but there was a spark of suspicion there, too. "My father. Amos, he didn't die of fever." "Did he?" she said, more to herself than to Caleb. "Kane wanted something from him, something he found out. And I think it's why I'm still alive." Caleb's blood ran cold. Amos Carter, a pharmacist, dead under mysterious circumstances. Clara, beaten but unbroken, chasing a truth that could get her killed. He didn't know what she'd uncovered, but he knew one thing: he wasn't letting her face it alone. Not after what he owed Samuel, not after seeing the fire in her eyes. The night stretched on, the fire crackling as Clara's words hung in the air. Outside, the Montana wind howled, carrying secrets that were only beginning to unravel. This was no longer just about a debt or a promise, it was about justice, and maybe something deeper, something neither of them was ready to name. If this tale of courage and mystery has you hooked, don't miss what's coming next. Smash that like button. Leave a comment, tell us what you think Clara's hiding, and subscribe to Wild West Stories for the next chapter. The frontier's calling, and this story's just getting started. The fire in Caleb Thornton's cabin flickered, casting shadows that danced across Clara Carter's face as she sat wrapped in a blanket, her eyes distant but fierce. The Montana night pressed against the windows, a restless wind rattling the panes. As if the secrets Clara carried were clawing to get out, Caleb knelt beside her, tending the cuts on her back with a gentleness that belied the storm brewing in his chest. Her words from moments ago echoed in his mind. "My father didn't die of fever." The accusation hung heavy, a spark ready to ignite a fire neither of them could control. Clara's voice broke the silence, low and steady, but laced with a tremor of defiance. Amos, my father, was too careful for fever to take him. He was a pharmacist, knew every herb, every cure. Someone wanted him gone. Caleb. And I think it's tied to Jasper Kane. She lifted her gaze, those wide, warm eyes locking onto his, daring him to believe her. He was working on something before he died. Something big. I found papers in his shop once, hidden in a drawer, maps, names, numbers. I didn't understand them then, but Kane's name was there, and so was Warrick's. Caleb's jaw tightened. Warrick. The name hit like a hammer. Ezekiel Warrick was no small-time thug like Kane. He was a land baron, a man whose wealth and influence stretched across Montana, with whispers of corruption trailing him like dust. If Amos Carter had uncovered something tying Kane to Warrick, it wasn't just a family matter, it was a fuse lit to a powder keg. Caleb leaned back, his hands stilling, the cloth he'd been using to clean Clara's wounds forgotten. What kind of papers, he asked, his voice rough, urgent. Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on the blanket. I don't know exactly. I was only 19 when he died. I didn't ask questions I should have. But I remember one thing: he'd been meeting with the Blackfoot, bringing them medicine, teaching them about herbs. He trusted them, said they knew the land better than any settler. Whatever he found, it was connected to their land. Her voice dropped, almost a whisper. And then he was gone. Caleb's mind raced, piecing together fragments. Amos, a pharmacist, digging into something dangerous. Kane, a bully with too much power. Warrick, a shadow pulling strings, and the Blackfoot, caught in the middle. He stood, pacing the small cabin, his boots thudding against the floorboards. The photograph of Clara, still on the mantel, seemed to watch him. Samuel's voice whispering through the years, "Tell her I wasn't afraid." Caleb stopped, his gaze falling on Clara. She wasn't just Samuel's sister anymore, she was a woman carrying a truth that could burn Eagle Creek to the ground. "We need to find those papers," he said, his voice firm, resolute. "If they're still in your father's shop, they're our only lead." Clara nodded, but her eyes flickered with doubt. Kane's men watch that shop like hawks. It's been locked up since Pa died, but they're always there, like they're guarding something. If we go, we'll be walking into a trap. "Then we move fast," Caleb said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Before Kane figures out you're not just a grieving daughter." He grabbed his coat, checking his revolver with a practiced flick. "Rest tonight. We'll head to town at dawn." But dawn never came quietly in the Wild West. A sharp crack split the night, a gunshot, close, followed by the pounding of hooves. Caleb's head snapped toward the window, his hand already on his gun. Clara was on her feet, the blanket falling to the floor, her face pale but her jaw set. "They've found us," she whispered. Caleb didn't wait. He yanked the door open, the cold night air rushing in as he scanned the darkness. Shadows moved beyond the fence riders, at least 4, their silhouettes jagged against the moonlight. Kane's men, no doubt, sent to finish what the whipping in the square had started. Caleb's blood boiled, but he kept his voice low, steady. "Clara, get to the back room. Bar the door." She grabbed his arm, her grip fierce. "I'm not hiding. Caleb, this is my fight, too." Before he could argue, she pulled a small derringer from her torn dress, her hands steady despite the pain she must have felt. Those eyes, burning with defiance, told him she wasn't backing down, not now. Not ever. The riders circled closer, their laughter cutting through the night, cruel and taunting. Thornton, one called, his voice dripping with malice. "Hand over the girl, or we burn this place down." Caleb stepped onto the porch, his revolver gleaming in the faint light. "You want her," he shouted back, his voice a low growl. "Come and take her." He fired a shot into the air, the crack echoing like thunder, a warning that he wasn't the broken soldier they thought he was. The fight was chaos fast, brutal, and deafening. The riders charged, their guns blazing, bullets splintering the cabin's walls. Caleb ducked behind a barrel, returning fire, his aim steady despite the years since he'd last fought. One rider fell, clutching his shoulder, his horse bolting into the dark. Clara was at the window, her derringer barking. each shot precise, her face a mask of focus. A bullet grazed Caleb's arm, hot and sharp, but he barely felt it. The adrenaline, the need to protect Clara, drowned out everything else. Then, a new sound: hooves, but not from Kane's men. From the north, a lone rider burst into view, moving like a shadow across the field. He was Blackfoot, his face painted with streaks of red, his bow drawn taut. Arrows flew, silent and deadly, taking down another of Kane's men before they could react. The tide turned, the remaining riders faltering, then fleeing into the night, their curses fading with the dust. Caleb lowered his gun, his chest heaving, blood trickling down his arm. Clara stepped onto the porch, her derringer still in hand, her eyes wide with shock and gratitude. The Blackfoot rider approached, his horse snorting, his gaze sharp but not hostile. "You are Thornton," he said, his voice deep, accented. "I am Swift Wind. Black Elk sent me. The woman carries Amos's truth. We protect her now." Caleb's heart pounded, the pieces falling into place. The Blackfoot knew Clara's father knew his secrets. Swift Wind's presence wasn't just chance, it was a lifeline. Clara stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos. "My father trusted your people. Whatever he found, it's yours as much as mine." Swift Wind nodded, his eyes gleaming with respect. "Then come to our camp. Bring what you find. Kane's shadow grows long, but we are not afraid." He turned his horse, vanishing into the dark as quickly as he'd come. Caleb and Clara stood in the silence, the air thick with gunpowder and questions. The fight had been a warning. Kane wasn't done, and Warrick's shadow loomed larger than ever. Clara's hand brushed Caleb's, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through him. Her warmth a reminder of what he was fighting for. They weren't just chasing Amos's truth anymore, they were running toward a reckoning. The dawn was coming, and with it, a dangerous path to Eagle Creek. What secrets waited in Amos's shop, and what price would they pay to uncover them? Stick with us to find out. Hit that like button, drop a comment, tell us who you think Swift Wind really is, and subscribe to Wild West Stories for the next chapter. The stakes are higher than ever, and this fight's only begun. The Montana dawn broke over Caleb Thornton's ranch, painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold, but the beauty felt like a lie after the night's violence. The air still carried the faint tang of gunpowder, and the splintered porch bore scars from Kane's men. Caleb stood by the corral, his arm throbbing where a bullet had grazed him, his dark eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. Clara Carter was inside, bandaging her own wounds with a stubbornness that made him both admire and worry for her. Her touch last night, brief, accidental, lingered in his mind, stirring feelings he hadn't let himself feel since the war. But there was no time for that now. Amos's shop in Eagle Creek waited, and with it, the truth that could either save them or bury them. Clara emerged from the cabin, her torn dress replaced with one of Caleb's old shirts, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. It hung loose on her frame, but the way she carried herself chin high, eyes blazing, made it look like she'd worn it on purpose. "Ready?" she asked, her voice steady despite the shadows under her eyes. She'd tucked her derringer into a makeshift belt, a reminder she wasn't just a victim, she was a fighter, and Caleb couldn't help but see Samuel in her resolve. "Ready," he said, tossing her a canteen, "but we're not riding into town like heroes in a dime novel. Kane's men will be watching. We take the back trails, move quiet." He paused, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "And try not to shoot anyone unless I say so." Clara raised an eyebrow, a spark of humor cutting through her tension. "No promises." "Thornton, you're not my captain." Her tone was teasing, but her eyes held his a moment too long, and Caleb felt his face warm an awkward flush he hadn't felt since he was a boy. He turned away, busying himself with the horses, muttering, "Just don't shoot me." The ride to Eagle Creek was tense, the forest path narrow and choked with pine. Every snap of a twig made Caleb's hand twitch toward his revolver, and Clara's silence beside him was loud with unspoken questions. He hadn't told her about Samuel yet, about the photograph or the promise. The words sat heavy in his throat, but every time he opened his mouth, something stopped him: fear. Maybe. or the guilt of carrying her brother's last moments like a secret he didn't deserve to keep. They reached the edge of town by mid-morning, tying their horses in a thicket and creeping toward Amos's old pharmacy. The shop was a weathered building, its sign faded but still legible Carter's Remedies. The windows were boarded, the door padlocked, but Clara's eyes lit up with a mix of pain and determination. This was his world, she whispered, her fingers brushing the doorframe. He'd spend hours here, mixing potions, talking to anyone who'd listen. He always said the right medicine could fix more than just a body. Caleb nodded, his heart twisting. He could almost see Amos, a kind-eyed man with Samuel's smile, pouring his life into this place. But sentiment wouldn't get them inside. He knelt by the lock, pulling a knife to pry it open, when a voice cut through the quiet like a whip. "Well, ain't this a sight, Caleb Thornton, turn-in thief in broad daylight?" Caleb spun, his hand on his gun, to find old man Pritchard, the town's nosiest shopkeeper, leaning against a barrel across the street. Pritchard was all wrinkles and whiskers, his grin half toothless and half mischievous. "And with a pretty lady, no less," he added, winking at Clara. "Didn't peg you for a romantic, Thornton." Clara's cheeks flushed, and Caleb groaned inwardly. Not now. "Pritchard," he growled, but the old man just chuckled, undeterred. "Relax, boy. I ain't telling Kane's boys nothin'. But you'd best hurry, those vultures are sniffing around town like dogs after a bone." He tipped his hat to Clara, his grin widening. "You're Amos's girl, ain't you got his fire? Good luck, Missy." Clara managed a small smile, but her eyes were on the shop. "Thank you," she said, then turned to Caleb, her voice low. "We don't have much time." The lock gave way with a snap, and they slipped inside, the door creaking shut behind them. The shop was a time capsule, shelves lined with dusty bottles, the air thick with the scent of herbs and old wood. Clara moved like she knew every inch, her hands tracing the counter where her father once worked. "He kept his secrets here," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Somewhere no one would look. Caleb scanned the room, his nerves taut. The boarded windows let in slivers of light, casting eerie stripes across the floor. "Where do we start?" he asked. But Clara was already kneeling by a cabinet, her fingers searching for something hidden. She paused, her breath catching, and pulled out a small wooden box, its surface carved with intricate patterns, flowers, vines, and what looked like Blackfoot symbols. "This is it," she said, her voice trembling with awe. "He told me once, if anything happens to me, Clara, find the box, the keys with the Blackfoot." I thought he was just being cryptic, but she trailed off, her fingers tracing the carvings. "We need that key." Before Caleb could respond, a shadow moved outside, a flicker through the boarded window. His heart lurched, and he pulled Clara down behind the counter, his hand over her mouth to stifle her gasp. Footsteps crunched outside, heavy and deliberate. Kane's men. Or worse. Caleb's eyes locked with Clara's, and in that moment, pressed close in the dim light, their breaths mingling, he felt a spark he couldn't name, a mix of fear, protectiveness, and something dangerously close to longing. Her hand gripped his arm, steadying them both, and for a heartbeat, the danger outside faded. The footsteps passed, but the tension didn't. Caleb eased up, his voice a whisper. "We've got the box. Now we need the Blackfoot." Swift Wind said to come to their camp, "Let's move." Clara nodded, clutching the box to her chest. But as they slipped out the back door, a new figure emerged from the alley. Jimmy, the red-headed boy from the ranch, his eyes wide with panic. "Mr. Thornton," he hissed, tripping over his own feet in his haste. "Kane's men are coming. They know you're here, and they're talking about Warrick, saying he's got plans for the Blackfoot land." Caleb's blood ran cold. The pieces were falling together too fast. Amos's death, the box, the Blackfoot, Warwick's shadow looming over it all. He grabbed Jimmy's shoulder, his voice low. "Get back to the ranch, kid. Stay out of sight." He turned to Clara, his jaw set. "We ride for the Blackfoot camp, now." As they mounted their horses, Clara's eyes met his, a mix of fear and fire. "Whatever's in this box," she said, "it's worth dying for. My father knew it, and so do I." Caleb felt the weight of her words, heavier than the revolver at his hip. He nodded, spurring his horse forward, Clara at his side, the carved box a silent promise of truth and trouble. The trail to the Blackfoot camp stretched ahead, fraught with danger, but something else was stirring too, a bond forged in the heat of this fight. Awkward and unspoken, but impossible to ignore. The Wild West doesn't let you rest, and neither does this story. Hit that like button, drop a comment. What do you think's in that box, and subscribe to Wild West Stories for the next chapter. The drama's only getting hotter, and you won't want to miss it. The Montana wilderness closed around Caleb Thornton and Clara Carter as they rode hard toward the Blackfoot camp. The carved wooden box tucked safely in Clara's saddlebag. The trail was rugged, twisting through dense pines and over rocky streams, the air sharp with the scent of earth and danger. Caleb's heart still raced from their narrow escape in Eagle Creek, the echo of Jimmy's warning. Kane's men are coming driving him to keep his eyes on the shadows. Clara rode beside him, her face set with determination, but he could see the strain in her posture, the way her hands gripped the reins. The lash marks on her back, hidden beneath his borrowed shirt, must have burned with every jolt of the horse. Yet she didn't complain. Her strength stirred something in him, a pull he couldn't quite name, though it warmed his blood in a way that felt both reckless and right. Dusk was settling, the sky bruising purple, when they reached a clearing near a rushing creek. The Blackfoot camp was still miles off, and their horses were lathered, their breaths heaving. Caleb reined in, his voice low. "We stop here for the night. Can't push the horses any harder. And we need to stay sharp." He glanced at Clara, expecting an argument, but she just nodded, her eyes catching the last light in a way that made his chest tighten. They dismounted, tying the horses to a low branch near the water. Caleb built a small fire, its glow a fragile shield against the vast, dark wilderness. Clara sat close, clutching the box, her fingers tracing its carvings as if they held answers she could feel but not yet see. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was heavy, charged with the weight of their shared fight and something more, something unspoken that had sparked in the chaos of the pharmacy. Caleb cleared his throat, trying to focus. "You should rest," he said, poking at the fire. "I'll keep watch." But his voice betrayed him, rougher than he meant. And when Clara's eyes met his, there was a knowing glint in them, a challenge that made his pulse quicken. "I'm not tired," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that felt like an invitation. She shifted closer, the firelight painting her face in soft golds, highlighting the curve of her cheek, the stubborn set of her jaw. His shirt hung loose on her, but it clung in places, hinting at the lines of her body beneath. Caleb's gaze lingered a moment too long, and he caught himself, looking away, his face heating. Clara noticed, and a small, teasing smile curved her lips. "What's wrong?" Thornton never seen a woman in a man's shirt before. Her tone was light, but her eyes held a spark, daring him to answer. He chuckled, the sound low and a little nervous, rubbing the back of his neck. Not one who looks like she's ready to take on Kane's whole posse, single-handed. He meant it as a deflection, but the truth slipped out. Clara was no damsel, and that fire in her drew him like a moth to flame. She laughed, a soft, genuine sound that cut through the night's tension. "You're not what I expected, either," she said, her voice dropping, intimate. "A rancher who fights like a soldier, risks everything for a stranger." "Why?" "Caleb." Her question wasn't just curiosity, it was a door, half open, waiting for him to step through. He wanted to tell her about Samuel, about the photograph, the promise that had haunted him for 11 years, but the words stuck, tangled in the sudden awareness of how close she was, the way her breath caught when their eyes locked. The fire's warmth seemed to fade compared to the heat building between them, a pull that felt dangerous and inevitable. He leaned closer, almost without thinking, his hand brushing hers where it rested on the box. Her skin was warm, her fingers trembling just enough to betray the calm she wore like armor. "Clara," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm not a hero. I'm just a man trying to do right by someone He stopped, the word love nearly slipping out, a confession too raw for this moment. Instead, he said, someone I owe. Her eyes searched his, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to just them, the crackle of the fire, the rush of the creek, the unspoken promise in her gaze. She leaned in, her lips parting, and Caleb's breath hitched. The space between them vanished, and their kiss was soft at first, tentative, like testing the edge of a cliff. Then it deepened, urgent and hungry, her hands finding his shoulders, his fingers tangling in her hair. It wasn't just desire, it was a release of everything they'd carried, her grief, his guilt, the shared weight of a fight that wasn't over. Her touch was fire, her breath against his lips, a spark that lit something long buried in him. They pulled back, breathless, her forehead resting against his. Clara's laugh was shaky, almost embarrassed. "Well," she murmured, "that's one way to keep warm." The humor broke the tension, but her eyes still held his, warm and unguarded, promising more than either of them could say. Caleb grinned, despite himself. "Better than a campfire," he said, his voice rough with feeling, but the moment shattered as a twig snapped in the darkness beyond the clearing. His hand flew to his revolver, instincts kicking in, and Clara grabbed her derringer, her body tense beside him. They stood, back to back, scanning the shadows, the intimacy of moments ago replaced by the sharp edge of survival. A low whistle cut through the night, not a threat, but a signal. Swift Wind stepped into the firelight, his face unreadable, his bow slung across his back. "You move too slow," he said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Kane's men are close. They track you. Come now, or you bring death to our camp." Clara clutched the box tighter, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We have what my father left. We need the key. Swift Wind. Will Black Elk help us?" The warrior nodded, his gaze flicking to Caleb, then back to Clara. "Black Elk waits, but the key comes with a price. Hurry." He turned, vanishing into the trees, leaving them no choice but to follow. Caleb doused the fire, his heart still racing from Clara's touch, from the danger closing in. He grabbed her hand, a quick, reassuring squeeze. "Stay close," he said, and she nodded, her smile faint but fierce. They mounted their horses, the box a heavy promise between them, and rode into the night, Swift Wind's shadow leading the way. The Blackfoot camp was their last hope, but Kane's men were closing in, and the truth in that box was a spark that could ignite a war. What would they find when they opened it? And what price would the Blackfoot demand? The answers were coming, and they wouldn't be gentle. This story's burning hotter than ever, so don't miss what's next. Smash that like button. Drop a comment. Tell us if you felt that spark between Caleb and Clara, and subscribe to Wild West Stories for the next chapter. The Wild West doesn't play nice, and neither does this tale. The night swallowed Caleb Thornton and Clara Carter as they followed Swift Wind through the Montana wilderness. The carved wooden box a heavy weight in Clara's saddlebag. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, the only sounds the muffled thud of hooves and the distant howl of a coyote. Caleb's senses were razor-sharp, his eyes scanning the shadows for Kane's men, his heart still racing from the kiss by the creek, a moment that felt like a lifetime ago, yet burned in his memory. Clara rode close, her face set with determination, but her silence carried a weight that matched his own. The Blackfoot camp was their sanctuary, but Swift Wind's warning echoed. The key comes with a price, whatever that meant. Caleb knew it wouldn't be simple. The camp emerged from the darkness like a vision, tents and teepees scattered along a riverbank. Their shapes softened by moonlight. Fires glowed, casting warmth across faces that turned to watch the newcomers. The Blackfoot warriors stood tall, their eyes sharp but not hostile, their hands resting on knives or bows. Swift Wind led them to the largest teepee, where an older man waited, his presence commanding despite the lines etched deep in his face. This was Black Elk, the chief, his dark eyes gleaming with wisdom and something sharper suspicion. Maybe, or hope. Clara dismounted, clutching the box, her voice steady but reverent. "Black Elk, I'm Clara Carter, Amos's daughter. My father trusted you. He left this box, said you'd have the key." She held it out, the carvings catching the firelight, their intricate patterns seeming to pulse with secrets. Black Elk studied her, then the box, his expression unreadable. Amos was a friend to our people, he said, his voice deep, measured. He saw what others ignored, the theft of our land, the lies of men like Warrick. But this box… He paused, his gaze flicking to Caleb, then back to Clara. It holds more than you know. And the key is not mine to give lightly. Caleb stepped forward, his hand resting on his revolver. Not as a threat, but a reflex. We're not here to cause trouble, he said, but Kane's men are hunting us. Whatever's in that box, it's what Amos died for. We need to know. Black Elk's eyes narrowed, but a faint smile touched his lips. You carry a soldier's heart. Thornton. But a man's guilt. Amos spoke of you, said you'd come one day, carrying his shadow. Caleb froze, his breath catching. Amos had known him. How the chief's words were a blade, cutting through years of silence, but before Caleb could ask, Black Elk raised a hand. The key is here, but first, you must understand its cost. He gestured to a young woman who stepped forward, her face striking, her eyes fierce yet kind. She held a small, intricately carved key, its design matching the box. This is Little Star, Black Elk said. She carries Amos's trust and his blood. The words hung in the air, a thunderclap that stole Caleb's breath. Clara's eyes widened, her hand tightening on the box, her voice a whisper. His blood Little Star met Clara's gaze, unflinching. Amos was my father, she said, her voice steady but laced with pain. He loved my mother, a Blackfoot woman, in secret. I am his daughter, your sister. The twist hit like a stampede. Clara staggered, the box nearly slipping from her hands, her face pale with shock. Caleb's mind reeled. Amos, a man of secrets, had a second family, a daughter hidden among the Blackfoot, the photograph on Caleb's mantle. Clara's face suddenly felt incomplete, as if it had always been missing this piece. He reached out, steadying Clara, his hand firm on her arm, but his own heart was pounding. Samuel had never mentioned another sister, but then Samuel hadn't known. Had Amos kept this from everyone? Clara's voice trembled, but her eyes burned with a mix of hurt and wonder. Why didn't he tell me, she asked, looking from Little Star to Black Elk. Why keep you a secret? Little Star's expression softened, but her voice held an edge. He protected me. Settlers like Warrick. Kane, they'd have used me against him, against our people. He gave me the key, told me to guard it until you came. He said you'd be strong enough to finish what he started. Black Elk nodded, his voice grave. The box holds Amos's proof papers, that name Warrick and Kane. Their plan to steal our land through forged deeds. They want us gone, moved to barren ground in Idaho. Amos died to stop them. Now, you carry his fight. Clara opened the box with trembling hands, the key turning smoothly in Little Star's grasp. Inside was a leather-bound journal and a stack of documents, maps, contracts, letters, all marked with names and dates. Clara's fingers traced her father's handwriting, her eyes filling with tears. He wrote this for us, she whispered. He knew they'd kill him. Caleb leaned over, scanning the pages. The words were an indictment. Warrick and Kane had bribed officials, forged land titles, and planned to force the Blackfoot out, all for profit. But one letter stood out, addressed to a Federal Marshal named Daniel Bryce. Amos had been sending evidence to the law, but he'd died before it reached its destination. Caleb's gut twisted. This was bigger than Eagle Creek, bigger than any of them. Before they could process more, a shout broke the night. A warrior burst into the camp, his face streaked with sweat. Riders, he yelled. Kane's men, coming fast. The camp erupted, warriors grabbing weapons, women and children moving to safety. Caleb's hand was on his revolver, his eyes meeting Clara's. She nodded, tucking the journal back into the box, her face fierce despite the shock of Little Star's revelation. Black Elk's voice boomed. Swift Wind, take the box to Bryce. Ride now. Swift Wind nodded, grabbing the box and vanishing into the darkness, his horse a blur. Caleb pulled Clara close, his voice low. Stay with me. We hold them off. Little Star stepped beside them, a bow in her hands, her eyes blazing. "I fight for my father, too," she said, and Clara reached out, squeezing her hand, a sister's bond forged in an instant, despite the years of secrets. The sound of hooves grew louder. Kane's men closing in, their torches flickering like demons in the night. Caleb's heart pounded, not just for the fight, but for the women beside him, Clara, fierce and unbroken, and Little Star, a sister born from a truth that changed everything. The Blackfoot camp was a fortress now, and they'd defend it, or die trying. What secrets will Swift Wind carry to Bryce, and can Caleb, Clara, and Little Star hold the line against Kane's wrath? The Wild West is full of surprises, and this one's just the beginning. Hit that like button, drop a comment, tell us how that twist hit you, and subscribe to Wild West Stories for the next chapter. The fight's coming, and it's going to be wild. The Blackfoot camp was a fortress of shadow and flame, the night alive with the flicker of torches and the thunder of hooves as Kane's men closed in. Caleb Thornton stood shoulder to shoulder with Clara Carter and her newfound sister, Little Star, their weapons ready, their faces set against the coming storm. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and sweat, the tension so tight it felt like the world might snap. Clara's hand still tingled from squeezing Little Star's, a bond forged in the revelation that Amos had hidden a daughter, a secret that made her heart ache and swell all at once. Caleb's gaze flicked to her, then to the darkness beyond, where the glow of Kane's torches grew brighter. Swift Wind was gone, carrying Amos's box of evidence to Federal Marshal Daniel Bryce. But the fight was here, now, and it would take everything they had to survive it. Black Elk's voice cut through the chaos, calm but commanding. "Warriors, to the ridge, protect the camp." The Blackfoot moved like a single breath, their bows and rifles gleaming in the firelight, their faces painted with resolve. Caleb gripped his revolver, his arm still stinging from the graze in Eagle Creek, but the pain was nothing compared to the fire in his chest. Clara, beside him, held her derringer with a steadiness that made him proud and a little nervous. She caught his look, her eyes flashing with a mix of defiance and something softer, something that reminded him of their kiss by the creek. "Don't get any ideas about playing hero." "Thornton," she said, her voice low but teasing, a spark of humor cutting through the fear. "I'm not the damsel type." Caleb's lips twitched, despite the danger. "Good," he shot back, "'cause I'm a terrible knight in shining armor. Armor's too heavy for Montana." Little Star snorted, her bow steady, and muttered, "You two flirt louder than the enemy rides." Clara's cheeks flushed, and Caleb felt his own face heat, an awkward warmth that was wildly out of place as Kane's men burst into view. The attack was a whirlwind of chaos, gunfire cracking, arrows hissing, horses screaming as they charged the camp. Kane's men, a dozen strong, fanned out, their torches casting eerie shadows across the teepees. Caleb ducked behind a stack of crates, pulling Clara with him, their bodies pressed close in the cramped space. Her breath was warm against his neck, and for a split second, the world narrowed to the feel of her, the scent of lavender still clinging to her, despite the dust and blood. "Not the time," she whispered, half laughing, half scolding, and he grinned, even as a bullet splintered the wood above their heads. "Couldn't help it," he murmured, then leaned out, firing at a rider who'd gotten too close. The man fell, clutching his leg, and Caleb shouted to Little Star, "Cover the left." She nodded, her arrows flying with deadly precision, each one finding its mark. The Blackfoot warriors fought with a ferocity that made Kane's men falter, but the enemy was relentless, their numbers pressing hard against the camp's defenses. In the chaos, Caleb spotted Jasper Kane himself, his broad frame unmistakable, his face twisted with rage as he barked orders. "Burn it down," he roared, tossing a torch toward a teepee. The flames caught, licking up the hide, and Clara gasped, her hand tightening on Caleb's arm. "They're going to destroy everything," she said, her voice thick with anger. "Not if we stop them," Caleb growled, but before he could move, a new figure stumbled into the fray, old man Pritchard, of all people, hobbling into the camp with a shotgun that looked older than he was. "Dang it. Thornton," he yelled, his voice cracking with indignation. You didn't say you were starting a war. I was just bringing you some biscuits." He fired a wild shot, missing everything but a tree, and Caleb couldn't help but laugh, the sound absurd in the middle of battle. "Pritchard, get down," Caleb shouted, but the old man just waved him off, muttering about young folks and their nonsense as he reloaded. Clara's eyes sparkled with amusement, but it faded fast as Kane's men regrouped, their gunfire intensifying. Caleb pulled her closer, his voice urgent. "We need to get to Kane, cut the head off, and the rest will scatter." Clara nodded, her jaw set. "I'm with you." Little Star joined them, her bow slung across her back, a knife now gleaming in her hand. "For our father," she said, and Clara's eyes softened, a silent vow passing between the sisters. They moved as one, dodging through the chaos, using the smoke and shadows for cover. The fight to reach Kane was brutal. Caleb's revolver barked, each shot deliberate, his soldier's instincts guiding him through the storm. Clara fired her derringer, her aim steady despite the madness, and Little Star's knife flashed, keeping a rider at bay. They reached the center of the camp, where Kane stood, his pistol raised, his eyes locking on Clara with a venom that made Caleb's blood boil. "You're a stubborn one, Carter," Kane sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Should have stayed tied to that post." He aimed at her, but Caleb was faster, tackling him to the ground, the pistol skidding into the dirt. They grappled, fists flying, Kane's strength surprising for a man his size. Clara shouted, Caleb, and tossed him her derringer, but before he could catch it, another figure emerged from the smoke. Federal Marshal Daniel Bryce, his badge glinting, his rifle trained on Kane. "Enough," Bryce roared, his voice cutting through the din. The fighting slowed, Kane's men hesitating as the Marshal's presence shifted the tide. "Jasper Kane, you're under arrest. Warrick's already in custody, your game's up." Caleb froze, still pinning Kane, his mind racing. Warrick caught how swift wind must have reached Bryce faster than they'd dared hope. Kane laughed, a harsh, desperate sound, and lunged for his fallen pistol. "Not yet. It ain't," he snarled, aiming at Clara. Time slowed, Caleb's heart lurching as he threw himself between them, the crack of the gunshot deafening. Pain seared through his shoulder, hot and sharp, but he didn't fall. Little Star's arrow flew, striking Kane's hand, and the pistol dropped as he howled. Bryce's men swarmed, cuffing Kane as he cursed, his empire crumbling in the dust. Clara rushed to Caleb, her hands on his face, her eyes wide with fear. "You idiot," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why'd you do that?" Her fingers brushed his wound, gentle but trembling, and he managed a weak grin. "Told you, I'm no hero. Just don't faint on me. Carter." She laughed, a shaky sound, and pressed her forehead to his, the world fading to just them for a moment. Little Star stood nearby, her knife still drawn, her eyes soft with relief. The camp was secure, the fires doused, Kane's men scattered or bound, but the fight wasn't over not until Amos's truth reached the world. The night held one last question. What would Bryce do with the evidence, and could Caleb and Clara survive the fallout? Don't miss the end of this wild ride. Hit that like button, drop a comment. Tell us if Pritchard's biscuits made you laugh, and subscribe to Wild West Stories for the final chapter. The West's calling, and it's time for justice. The Blackfoot camp stood battered but unbroken under the Montana dawn, the air heavy with the scent of smoldering fires and the faint promise of peace. Caleb Thornton leaned against a tree, his shoulder throbbing where Kane's bullet had torn through, but the pain was a distant hum compared to the warmth of Clara Carter's hand on his face. Her eyes, wide and fierce, held a mix of relief and something deeper, something that made his heart stutter. Little Star stood nearby, her knife sheathed, her gaze soft as she watched the sisters' newfound bond hold strong amidst the chaos. Federal Marshal Daniel Bryce oversaw Kane's men, now bound and disarmed, their torches extinguished, their power shattered. Jasper Kane himself knelt in the dirt, his hands cuffed, his sneer gone, replaced by the sullen glare of a man who'd lost everything. The box of Amos's evidence, carried by swift wind, had reached Bryce, and the truth it held was about to change the West forever. Clara's fingers lingered on Caleb's cheek, her touch grounding him as she whispered, "You're still an idiot." Thornton. But I'm glad you're alive. Her voice was soft, teasing, but her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and he knew it wasn't just about the fight. It was about them, about the promise he'd carried for Samuel, the kiss by the creek, the way she'd become his reason to keep fighting. He managed a crooked smile, wincing as he shifted his wounded shoulder. Takes more than a bullet to keep me down. Carter. Besides, I owe you a proper dance, not just a tussle with Kane's goons. She laughed, a bright, clear sound that cut through the morning's weight, and for a moment, the world felt lighter, like the dawn itself was holding its breath for them. Bryce approached, his badge glinting in the rising sun, his face etched with the weariness of a man who'd seen too much but still believed in justice. "Miss Carter, Miss Little Star," he said, nodding to them both. "Amos's journal and papers, they're enough to bury Warrick and Kane for good. Forged deeds, bribes, plans to drive the Blackfoot out. It's all here. Warrick's already confessed in custody, trying to save his own skin. The government's sending men to audit every land deal in Montana. The Blackfoot's land stays theirs." Little Star's eyes shone with pride, her voice steady. "My father's truth lives. Thank you, Marshal." She turned to Clara, her sister, and reached out, their hands clasping tight. "He'd be proud of you, Clara. Of us." Clara's throat tightened, her gaze flickering to the horizon where the river gleamed like a promise. "He gave us this fight," she said softly. "And you, Little Star. I wish I'd known you sooner." The sisters embraced, a quiet moment of healing that Caleb watched with a pang in his chest. He thought of Samuel, of the photograph on his mantle, and knew it was time. He reached into his coat, pulling out the worn picture of Clara, its edges soft from years of carrying it. "Clara," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This belongs to you." He handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers, and told her everything Wilderness Run. Samuel's sacrifice, the words he'd carried for 11 years, "Tell her I wasn't afraid." Clara's eyes filled as she clutched the photograph, her breath catching. "He loved you," Caleb finished, his voice breaking. "And I swore I'd find you. I'm sorry it took so long." Clara stepped close, her hand finding his, her voice steady despite the tears. "You kept your promise, Caleb. That's enough." She leaned in, kissing him softly, a gentle echo of their moment by the creek. But this time it was a vow, a beginning, not a fleeting spark. Little Star smiled, nudging them playfully. "Save some of that for the wedding. You too." The camp stirred with life as the Blackfoot began to rebuild, their voices rising in songs of gratitude and strength. Black Elk approached, his eyes warm. "Thornton, Clara, you've honored Amos's fight. Stay with us. Build here. The valley welcomes you." Caleb looked at Clara, her hand still in his, and saw the future in her eyes, a life not just of survival, but of hope. Months later, the valley bloomed with new life. Caleb and Clara, now married, stood on a hill overlooking fields where settlers and Blackfoot worked side by side, planting crops, building homes. They'd named the valley Hope's Dawn, a tribute to Amos, Samuel, and the truth that had brought them together. Little Star was there, teaching the children Blackfoot and settler alike her father's knowledge of herbs, her laughter a bridge between worlds. The land, once threatened, was protected, and Amos's evidence had sparked reforms that rippled across Montana, giving voice to those long silenced. Caleb pulled Clara close, her warmth a steady anchor against the breeze. "Think Samuel's watching?" he asked, his voice low, a smile tugging at his lips. Clara leaned into him, her eyes bright. "I know he is, and he's not afraid, not for us. Not anymore." They stood together, the valley stretching before them, a testament to love, justice, and the courage to build something new from the ashes of the past. This is the end of our tale, but the Wild West never stops calling. Hit that like button, drop a comment. Tell us how Hope's Dawn made you feel, and subscribe to Wild West Stories for more tales of heart, grit, and glory. The frontier's full of stories, and we're just getting started.